Well, thanks, Jacob, for your kind words. And sometime during 2018, somebody suggested that I write a kind of a chapter length text about tobacco. And from, as I wish, from the perspective that as an anthropologist who works with Amazonian people, from the perspective that I felt comfortable with. And I immediately thought of doing an interview with Rafael Chanchari. He's a smart, eloquent, indigenous fellow in his 50s who's been working with these plants for a long time. Anytime I've spoken previously with Rafael, it had always been interesting and pertinent. He's actually interviewed in the book that I did in 2005 called Intelligence in Nature. So anytime I have kind of philosophical questions for an indigenous Amazonian thinker, Rafael would certainly be one of the people I would turn to. So I happened to be in Iquitos, Peru. I asked Rafael whether he'd agree to do a conversation about tobacco, and he accepted, saying that it was one of the most important medicinal plants from the indigenous perspective. And so we met and we did an interview where I simply turned on the tape recorder and asked him questions spontaneously. And when I got home and then transcribed this conversation, I felt that it was so good that it would be possible to turn it into something a little bit more than just a chapter in some book. And what was apparent was that what he said as an indigenous Amazonian person about the plant seemed to be extremely advanced. So he would say things like, well, one of the things that tobacco does is that it strengthens the male and female hormones. So hormone is a kind of a scientific term. Rafael lives in the same world as we all do. He knows about hormones and science. But still, I didn't know anything about tobacco or nicotine strengthening female and male hormones in the human body. And at this point, this is something that's fairly easy to look up. You can be in your office in the middle of nowhere and go on internet and type testosterone and nicotine, or estrogen and nicotine, or even just sex hormones and nicotine. And you'll see that this is indeed true. As an anthropologist, I'm no expert in tobacco or in nicotine or even in the molecular workings of the human body, but I know how to read scientific articles, and I know how to go back and forth between systems of knowledge. So here, at this, I figured that this was getting interesting, because by giving the microphone to an indigenous Amazonian elder, paying attention to what he said about the tobacco plant, and then going and checking it out in the recent scientific literature about tobacco and nicotine, it became apparent that there were all kinds of direct correspondences between these two apparently different systems of knowledge. And by paying attention to what Rafael said, and then paying attention to what scientists were writing about in their different publications, it seemed clear that these two perspectives could be brought together, that they complemented each other. And so after doing a chapter where Rafael gets the mic, as it were, I did another chapter where I surveyed the current scientific literature on tobacco and nicotine. And then readers can make up their own minds. They can see what the indigenous perspective on the plant is, and then see what the scientific perspective is on the same subject. And some people may find the indigenous view easier to understand or even more convincing. Other people may find the contrary. Personally, I think of these two different systems of knowledge as two languages, like French and English, where you can translate, you can go back and forth. Sometimes you can't translate because the concepts don't correspond. But still, one language is better for saying some things, the other language is better for saying other things. There's not that one language is better than another, but just that they have their respective strengths and weaknesses. And if you're bilingual, you can go back and forth between them, and you have more concepts. So that, for example, as a scientifically trained, academically trained Westerner who has begun to understand the indigenous Amazonian point of view on things, I can consider a question scientifically and then say to myself, how would an Amazonian person think about this? And this can generate new ideas, new angles, new hypotheses. So it's not something that takes away from science, but that adds additional perspectives. After seeing how treating tobacco this way produced two simple and clear chapters. Raphael gets the mic, science gets the mic. I thought, we could actually make a little book of this and just do the same thing with ayahuasca. Start over, go back to Iquitos, give the mic to Raphael, tell us what you know about ayahuasca, and then look at what the science of ayahuasca has been able to determine. In this case, what is immediately apparent is that science has studied tobacco for 200 years. And so actually scientific knowledge about tobacco and nicotine is fairly extensive. But science has only really studied ayahuasca seriously for, let's say, 30 years. So it's a new science. And so there may be hundreds of publications about ayahuasca right now coming out every year. But that doesn't change the fact that there's a lot that is still not really understood about ayahuasca, about how it works, about just what is ayahuasca. And in the case of ayahuasca, it's very clear that setting up a dialogue between indigenous experts like Rafael Chanchari Pisuri, but there are many others as well, who have deep knowledge about the plant and how it works, and even about the botanical identification of the plant. This is one of the first things that emerges in a dialogue with Rafael, is that if from the indigenous point of view, there's not one kind of ayahuasca, science would call it Banisteriopsis capi, but several different kinds of ayahuascas with different, and we're just talking about the ayahuasca vine here, not about the brew that has the name of the vine. Indigenous Amazonians and other mestizo Amazonian experts have long recognized that there are different kinds of ayahuasca. The vines have different aspects. They can have knots, they can be smooth. The inner bark has different colors, and these different kinds of ayahuascas have different effects. But this has simply not been studied, and scientists have said that there's only one species. Well, Richard Evans Schultes, the famous ethnobotanist from Harvard, in the 20th century. He said in the 1970s that taking the indigenous point of view on the ayahuasca varieties seriously would be an avenue for future research. He also called it a botanical enigma. But this avenue for future research was never really explored. Only in 2018 did an international team of scientists launch an investigation into this question. These are that's a very basic question. There are other very basic questions about ayahuasca that if you start taking the indigenous point of view seriously, then it means that several scientific points of view need to be adapted. And I think the first, for example, is that what Amazonian people say, like Rafael Chanchari, they call ayahuasca the purge. And that's, in their view, its first effect before showing you images and so forth. It cleans you. And for them, that's the beginning and it's the basis of its therapeutic effect. If you look at contemporary scientific literature on ayahuasca, when they put people who've taken ayahuasca into brain imaging machines to see what's going on in the brain and the mind of people who've taken ayahuasca, they describe vomiting as an adverse effect. I mean, obviously, vomiting in fMRI machines is not desirable, but still, what is considered to be the first effect of ayahuasca, because frankly, when you swallow this bitter brew and it goes down your gullet into your stomach, before inspiring any kind of remarkable visions, it will certainly give you nausea and perhaps produce nausea, so produce purging. And so ayahuasca, before being a psychedelic, a revealer of psyche, it's a bodily experience. And this is just how you experience the plant when you ingest it. And that is how Amazonian people talk about it. Before being a plant teacher that shows you things and that allows you to understand things from different angles, the first thing it does is that it purges you. So there are basic aspects of ayahuasca, such as the ones that I've just mentioned, that science hasn't really been able to take into account. No doubt also because it's been difficult for scientists up until now to think about engaging a true dialogue with indigenous experts on these subjects. It's true that Western medicine does not think that vomiting is something positive. So it does go against the presuppositions of, let's just say, Western medical science. But still, when you work with a powerful vegetal concoction like ayahuasca from the Amazon, it almost calls for a new kind of science, that if you just go into studying ayahuasca as you would study any other thing, then you're going to miss a lot of essential points. This is another thing that is apparent with the science of ayahuasca, is that for a long time, scientists wanted to understand, so what is the active ingredient? This is almost like a reductionist scientific obsession. So there's got to be an active molecule here. So which one is it? So they looked for a long time, and they found harmine, harmaline, tetrahydroharmine. These are alkaloids that are harmala alkaloids that are in the vine itself, that are lightly hallucinogenic, but they don't seem to be present in sufficient quantities to explain the visions that ayahuasca can unleash in people. So harmine was never really the sufficient explanation. And it was only in the 1970s that two chemists, one from Switzerland, the other from Sweden, Rivier and Lindgren, found in some ayahuasca brews that there was DMT. And then in the 1980s, the explanation was, even though DMT is usually orally inactive, the harmala alkaloids act as MAO inhibitors. And that is the explanation, that what ayahuasca is a form of orally active DMT. The harmala alkaloids block the MAO enzyme in the stomach that usually blocks the DMT. And so by combining the chacruna plant that contains the DMT with the vine that has these MAO inhibitors, what you actually have is orally active DMT, and the active ingredient is DMT. Well, the molecular fit seemed perfect, and so this is actually still, I think, the reigning orthodoxy of what is ayahuasca. But there are several fundamental problems with this view. The first being that there are numerous indigenous traditions in the Amazon that do not add chacruna, which contains DMT, to the ayahuasca. In fact, that simply prepare vine-only ayahuasca. So they take the vine called ayahuasca, and they either do a cold extraction, so they break up the vine and leave it in cold water for a while, or they boil it for a while, a cold extraction or a hot extraction, and they drink that pure vine extract. It contains the harmala alkaloids and several other bioactive substances that have not been studied sufficiently for the moment. And there it is. And when you drink this kind of pure ayahuasca, you get more subtle visions, more subtle colors. It is psychoactive, and the anthropological literature is full of reports by people like Richard Spruce, the 19th century ethnobotanist, or Rachel Dolmatov, the Colombian anthropologist, who had vine-only extracts and then described their visions. In other words, you don't need the chacruna and the DMT to have visionary ayahuasca. And in fact, what ayahuasca is a cocktail. It's a vine that you can then boil up with many different plants. Jonathan Ott repertoried 97 different plants used in the Amazon as additives to ayahuasca, so that any given ayahuasca can either be pure vine, or it can contain tobacco, or coca, or datura, or chacruna, which means that it can also contain nicotine, or cocaine, or DMT, or scopolamine, so that it can be a mix of psychoactive substances, depending on who prepared it, what plants were available, and what they were trying to do, what kind of brew they were wanting to prepare. So ayahuasca by no means is defined as a kind of a standardized mix of vine on the one hand and DMT containing chacruna on the other. Ayahuasca has more or less the same meaning as cocktail. It's by definition a mix. There is no standard cocktail, and there can be no standard ayahuasca. But when you read the scientific literature now on ayahuasca. If you read the small print, the conditions of the research, invariably they'll tell you that the research was conducted using a batch of standardized ayahuasca brewed from the vine Banisteriopsis caapi and from the chacruna plant Psychotria viridis. So because science wants standardized substances to study, it invents this fiction of what is ayahuasca that actually blacks out or hides the rest of what is really true in terms of the varieties of ayahuasca as they are brewed up across the Amazon. So that's also where taking, if you're going to study a plant like ayahuasca and you're a scientist, you really gain from taking indigenous knowledge about this Amazonian plant seriously, because they have real deep practice-based knowledge. And by taking it seriously, you can avoid making a lot of mistakes. And so back to the book and to the book talk, I thought that the interesting thing would be to make it short, small, not long. It doesn't take long to read. It's that. So there are these two plants. There are these two perspectives on these two plants. And you can, if you're interested in these plants, you can read the Amazonian perspective, read the scientific perspective, and then figure out what's useful for you. But it's also a small exercise that shows that it's easy to talk with Indigenous people and listen to them and learn from them. And it's easy then to think about the same things from a scientific perspective. And it's actually easy, I find, to go back and forth between the two. And I don't think the point is to try to figure out which perspective you prefer. It's that they complement each other. And so they're both good. They're both interesting. And what is above all interesting is the fact that they can be combined, that you can become bilingual. It takes more work, I think. You know, a lot of people, when they have the privilege of being monolingual, only speaking English, let's say, and so, okay, it's a lot easier. You don't have to waste any time with those French verbs, Italian verbs, Spanish verbs, or any of that, and you can do other things. It's true. It does take, there's initial kind of time investment. But when you have that second language under your belt, suddenly you have these new words, new ways of thinking of things. And I think that if we're talking about specifically Amazonian plants like tobacco and ayahuasca, being able to understand the Amazonian approach to these plants, and then being able to understand the scientific understanding of these plants, and being able to go back and forth between these two perspectives, I think equips people with what you need to know if you're going to be interacting with these plants. So I'm not saying that on all questions in the world do people need to go back and forth between different systems of knowledge. But certainly when working with these two plants, I think it just makes basic sense. It's I think that, so the Amazonians would say these are plant teachers. Scientists might say that both tobacco and ayahuasca enhance cognition. I think those are just different ways of saying the same thing. But one thing is pretty clear is that when you work with powerful plants like tobacco and ayahuasca, and you ingest them so that what then occurs is a modification of your consciousness and of your body state and so forth. This is risky territory. It's like going mountain climbing when you're not a professional alpinist. Yeah, so that's why you want to, before you go doing that kind of, it's an extreme sport working with these powerful plants. And so that's why doing one's homework first and getting understanding of just what one is dealing with is part of, I think, what makes basic sense. So that's what I would say about this book. But I'd also say that the whole point is not for me to talk about it and for you to be listening to this and say, okay, I got it. The whole point is to read it. You know, the words are there and they've been lined up. And this book is made for reading, and but also critiquing and digesting. So that's it. And at this point, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, here's a question from Don. How is tobacco used in the Amazon? I assume smoking is not the only use?
Yeah, I had the good fortune of being with people, the Ashaninka people in the Peruvian Amazon. I think they use it in all possible means, which is they smoke it, they eat it, they drink it, they sniff it, and they also do rectal absorption through enemas. So they don't put it in their ears, but they use it in many different forms. It's a medicine because simply the leaves can be applied to wounds. They accelerate the healing of wounds. They disinfect them. They are, nicotine is an analgesic painkiller. So in Ashaninka, so this is the language of the people that I was living with, the word for shaman is sheri piari. Sheri means tobacco. So you have a problem, you go and see the tobacco doctor. And the first thing the tobacco doctor will do, most probably, if you have a wound or a fever, will blow some tobacco smoke on you. And we're not talking industrial cigarettes here. This is also a fundamental misunderstanding, is that in the Western world, people associate tobacco with industrial cigarettes, which are a long way away from this dark, powerful, I say dark, I mean brownish. Amazonian tobacco is brownish. It has 20 times more nicotine than the blonde tobacco that they grow in Virginia and other places. The tobacco industry has selected plants that are weak in nicotine, and then they've sauced them up with hundreds of different chemicals so that when you burn one of these nicotine delivery devices, which is how they think of cigarettes, you're actually getting a mix of poisonous chemicals that are not present when you burn this Amazonian tobacco. So it's difficult to even have a conversation because we're not even talking about the same thing. Amazonian tobacco, and I'm not saying that it's not dangerous. In fact, it should be clear that what nicotine is an insecticide. In other words, the plant produces it to kill insects that eat its leaves. And if you could extract the nicotine that is in 3 industrial cigarettes and just boil it down into a drop of pure nicotine, that drop would kill you if you put it on your skin or on your tongue. So nicotine is a deadly poison. And if you have never had any tobacco and then suddenly you take a large dose of tobacco tea from the Amazon, you actually do risk dying from nicotine overdose. So Amazonian tobacco is extremely powerful and is better understood as a hallucinogen, really. I mean, it's a plant from the nightshade family. It's not exactly a psychedelic in terms of even the receptors that it activates. It activates similar receptors to the ones activated by datura. So we're more in a kind of a deliriant hallucinogen than a psychedelic hallucinogen. But it is still extremely powerful. And it can be dangerous, but not at all for the same reasons as industrial cigarettes. And well, Paracelsus said already that the poison is in the dose. And so something that can be poisonous and deadly, depending on how you dose it, it can become therapeutic. Just about the levels of nicotine, when you smoke any tobacco, the good news is that most of the nicotine is destroyed in the combustion. And so, because if you could have access to all the nicotine that's in the tobacco that you smoke, you would die from nicotine overdose. So actually smoking tobacco has that advantage, is that it protects you from having a nicotine overdose. And actually, if you're smoking tobacco that's too powerful, too strong in nicotine, and you smoke it and you inhale, and you get a sort of a very heavy dose of nicotine, you will pass out before you can keep on smoking. So smoking is a way that it's the least risky way of working with powerful tobacco. Rectal absorption, in case you're tempted, is the most dangerous way. You put a plug of powerful tobacco in your anus, and the nicotine that's in it will be entirely absorbed very quickly, and you simply risk dying. So it should be clear that shamanic Amazonian tobacco is a powerful and dangerous plant. You need to know how to use it. But they use it in external applications, like a nicotine patch, as a painkiller in case of snake bite, in cases of wounds, and as a kind of a general remedy. That's why the doctor is called the tobacco doctor, is that first and foremost, when in doubt, blow smoke on people. It'll calm them. It'll take away some of their pain. And then the tobacco shamans also use the tobacco for the diagnostic, to think about the case that they have in front of them. So that's why that's why tobacco is the #1 plant medicine across indigenous Amazonia. So that's how I'd answer the question.
Thank you. There's a question from Cindy. She writes, what is the spiritual purpose of taking ayahuasca? I've had 2 journeys and they were very different and yet had some similarities. They referred to the plant medicines as grandmother. Can you speak to the spiritual side of ayahuasca?
Actually, I quibble with the word spiritual, I've got to say. And so I'll just go right ahead and quibble with it so as to answer the question. Spirit is, it's a Western concept. It's a word that comes from the Latin spiritus, that refers to the breath of God. Spiritus means breath. It's defined in dictionaries as an immaterial principle. And so there is this dichotomy between matter and spirit. So spirit is what matter isn't. the Ashaninka people with whom I lived, for example, when you would talk to them about the entity, they said, so plants, animals, people, there are these entities inside us that animate us. They're invisible. In our language, they're called maninkari. Maninkari means those who are hidden. It doesn't mean those who are immaterial. It means those who you normally don't see, but when you take ayahuasca, when you take tobacco, you can see them. These maninkari, they are also ashaninka, which is their word for themselves. It means people like us. So the normally invisible entities that animate all living beings, they are people like us. They make the kinship that we have with other species. And when these entities leave the organisms that they animate, these organisms die. So they're part and parcel of living organisms. They're not that immaterial in indigenous concepts. So when missionaries or anthropologists fly into the Amazon and they say, okay, so what are your concepts here? And people say, oh, well, we think that there are maninkari animating living beings. The outsiders say, oh, yeah, so according to the Ashaninka, there are invisible spirits inside plants and so forth. But no, they didn't say spirits. They didn't say this immaterial thing. They have this other concept. Spiritual, I'm not sure exactly what it is. Personally, I'm an agnostic. And so, I get the point. Spiritual, like, for example, when I go out into my garden, I like gardening. I like being out there with the plants and the bees and the so forth, and the quietness. Is it spiritual? I don't know. I mean, so somebody might say, oh, yes, he's a spiritual gardener. Other people might say, no, he's just raking up the leaves, Personally, I don't put that label on it, and I'm not quite sure what it might mean. I know that I'm not religious in the sense of like an official religion with texts and so forth. Grandmother ayahuasca, I mean, if you look in plant teachers, I think we kind of discreetly shot that concept down, because if you ask somebody like Rafael Chanchari, it's quite interesting. These different plant teachers in indigenous concepts do have genders. Tobacco, for example, is notably masculine across, and I'm not saying this is what I think, it is that all indigenous Amazonian cultures agree about this. So, I mean, that's striking. But then, so what do they say about ayahuasca? Because yes, they say that the entities that animate plants like tobacco and ayahuasca, they can call them mother or owner or father. So a lot of people have heard about the mother of ayahuasca. So they think, the spirit of ayahuasca is feminine. But no, actually, when we start the conversation off with Rafael Chanchari on tobacco, the first conversation, he starts telling me about the mother of tobacco and that it's a masculine entity. That was my first question. So you're saying the mother is a man? Yes, the mother is a man, and then off it goes. Well, okay, so the owner of tobacco or the mother of tobacco is this masculine entity according to indigenous concepts. What about ayahuasca? What's interesting about ayahuasca, and you can find this in the anthropological literature, it's not just Rafael Chanchari Pisuri, but that what is striking about the essence or the personality or the owner of ayahuasca, sometimes masculine, sometimes feminine, and that's the whole point, is that it's always changing. It can be both. It's certainly not grandmother ayahuasca with capital G and capital A. But the Westerners who have gone down there recently and who have looked into it fairly quickly, and they think, the mother of ayahuasca, grandmother ayahuasca. And so there's this new concept generated by Western ayahuasca drinkers. And, you know, I don't want to say that people are wrong or anything to talk about grandmother ayahuasca. I mean, sometimes ayahuasca can incarnate itself in your visions as a grandmother, sometimes as a grandfather, sometimes as a hummingbird, sometimes as an army of male and female doctors, sometimes as a black boa, sometimes as a yellow boa. Ayahuasca has no fixed persona. And that's the indigenous point of view. So knowing that, it's like ayahuasca has no fixed recipe either, which is what I was talking about before. I think saying, oh yes, there is a standard form of ayahuasca and it's the vine and the chacruna, it's like saying, the mother of ayahuasca is this grandmother figure. It's sort of, you know, turning it into this monolithic thing, whereas the whole point is that that's not what it is, you know. So but of course it's a free world, and people want to sort of, you know, make a kind of a new religion out of ayahuasca and say that grandmother ayahuasca is the sort of you know, deity that goes with the plant. Who am I to say that they shouldn't be doing this? But still, I would invite them to read the book and then to think again, you know, that actually I do think that ayahuasca initially belongs to Amazonian people. And so that if we're going to have respect for indigenous knowledge, indigenous people, indigenous plants, then it's important to take their point of view into consideration. And their point of view is that ayahuasca has no fixed persona.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on plant medicine, such as ayahuasca, being used in like a contemporary therapeutic context?
Well, it's true that when you look at how the Western world kind of can fit in with the indigenous world, that the interface is not always easy. And I mean, let's not talk about, because there's been a lot of just taking indigenous plants and taking them away and then extracting the active ingredients, and then there's nothing for the people who initially discovered the plants, and so voila. Here, it's true that the therapeutic, medical, laboratory, active ingredient approach, which has pharmaceutical companies just behind it. They've got markets. Turns out it works as an antidepressant. And there's a $1 billion, $2 billion a year market for an effective antidepressant. So, I mean, and it turns out that in research conducted in Brazil, one dose of ayahuasca is having a noticeable positive impact on people with chronic depression. That one dose will last for 8 months, whereas the antidepressants that are on the market are these daily pills and that don't even work as well. So, I mean, one of the problems here is that it might actually become real soon, and it's, you know, as soon as there are billions of dollars involved, it's going to get pretty complicated. That said, I think it's all about bringing together different forms of knowledge for the good of humanity, so that if there actually are illnesses and people suffering, if we can combine Amazonian plants, scientific knowledge, and somehow, even though it's not an easy fit, even though turning it into a pill that the FDA will recognize often sort of changes the whole thing, and it's not an easy fit, and it's filled with contradictions. But still, the idea that these two approaches can be brought together and be good for human health, I think is a positive thing, and that the frictions that are visible are interesting frictions, and they gain from being addressed and up front and on the table. And that's the whole point of this book, is to show that actually sitting down at a table and talking with an indigenous expert is fairly easy. All you got to do is do it and have an open mind. But then once you draw all the consequences of that knowledge, and then scientific knowledge, and then how they can be brought together, and then what do we do with that, that's when it gets complicated. But that doesn't mean that we've got to turn away from it, or it just makes it more, it spices it up, really.
Thank you. What are some ways that you've referenced this, but what are some examples of how science and shamanistic views differ around tobacco and nicotine, as well as with ayahuasca?
Well, finally, when talking about a plant, like let's just say tobacco. So what is tobacco? The scientific view seems to be tobacco is a plant that contains different molecules. It actually is a small chemical factory. It produces 4,000 different kinds of molecules. The one that interests science most is nicotine, but there are several others in there. It's an alkaloid. So these are secondary molecules that the plant produces and that don't actually play an immediate role inside the plant. So they're there. Secondary molecules are there for interacting with the outside world. And the plant puts a lot of energy into producing these substances, and in particular nicotine. Finally, from the scientific point of view, the plant is a bag of molecules. And what we're really interested in is those molecules. So it all kind of boils down to nicotine. And actually, if I've been talking about the science of tobacco, but it's most often the science of nicotine. I mean, science went molecular in the 70s, 80s. And so then it's all about DNA, proteins, receptors, and molecules. And that's what, biology, the organism is lost, and even the cell is out of the picture. We're down with the molecules. And that's what we're interested in. And in the case of tobacco, it's the nicotine. So what is tobacco? It's a bag of nicotine. I'm simplifying, but finally, that's kind of how it is. On the indigenous side, they're saying, no, bag. No, it's not a bag. It's an entity. It's like a person. It's a plant teacher. It's a powerful being. It's a master plant. You can't master it. You got to make sure it doesn't master you. Interacting with this plant, you can learn a lot of things, but it can really kick your butt. You got to be careful. You've got to respect it. You got to know it. You don't fool around with it. It's like a powerful person, like a powerful teacher. It's like, going and seeing a sort of famous university professor or something. And so this is the big difference right here, is that indigenous people personify plants and animals to know them. Science objectifies plants and animals to know them. So that is a kind of a basic difference. I think that when we think about this difference, so is tobacco a bag of nicotine, or is it a sort of sentient and powerful entity that has something like a personality? I think it can be both. And I simply think about my own experience of being an organism in the world. I am a bag of molecules. I am a bag of flesh and bones. And, that if we cut the flesh, blood will come dripping out of it. That's true. But I think that I'm also a person. In other words, you can be a flesh bag, and you can also be a person at the same time. There is no contradiction between those two points of view. Amazonian people actually do not make this. They're not in this dichotomy between matter and spirit. They're in certain languages, like in Rafael Chanchari's language, Shawi, the word that we translate as spirit, wayan in Shawi, is the same word for talking about the essence of the wood of the plant when you soak it in water. And so that the spirit of the plant is also the physical manifestation, its taste, its smell, it's that milky thing you see when you let the plant soak in water. So for Rafael Chanchari, nicotine, tobacco clearly contains substances. It is also a powerful entity that has something like a personality, and that when you ingest it, this entity impacts on your personality and shows you things. So the friction that the original question, where are there friction between the two sides, is that the hardcore, hard-boiled scientist will say tobacco is only the nicotine molecules it contains. Okay, you can believe that if you want, and you can believe there's all the rest is just, superstitious and superfluous stuff. But I actually think that understanding a plant like tobacco, it helps to personify it as well. So you can talk about the nicotine that it contains, and I think that's important. But understanding that it's a powerful entity that can impact your personality, and that for all extents and purposes, it has something like a personality. I mean, it's powerful, it's addictive, it can mislead you, it can inspire you. It's interacting with a plant like tobacco is like meeting a powerful person. So even if tobacco is not really a person, and that question is still undetermined, it's like a person. And having the capacity to understand it as such, I think gives you more tools to be able to deal with it. And if people who consume tobacco on a regular basis knew that it's not only that it contains nicotine and other substances that might be bad for your health, but that it is like a powerful person that can kick your butt, and that you got to understand how to approach if you're going to work with this plant productively and by causing the least harm to yourself as possible. But actually combining objectifying tobacco with personifying tobacco and bringing those 2 points of view together gets you to a place where you have a better understanding of what's going on. So I think that is really where there are the fundamental differences and frictions between these two ways of understanding, but still they can be overcome.
Thank you. Well, this is really fascinating. We've reached the hour. I feel like we could have talked for hours on this. It's so very interesting. And just this convergence of science and shamanism. So I will continue to explore this, and I know our listeners will as well. And I wish to remind everybody, Plant Teachers, Ayahuasca, Tobacco, and the Pursuit of Knowledge is available from Banyan Books. So you can visit Banyan, BANYEN.com. And on behalf of Banyan Books, thank you all for coming today. And thank you, Dr. Jeremy Narby.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.